The day was peaceful, the sky was clear and the air was a cool and comfortable temperature, this there was no denying. Without a doubt the picture-perfect day for any wandering travelers passing through the area to just stop and truly enjoy the splendor of the beautiful day that Arceus had blessed them with. As luck would actually happen to have it, the most important of any aforementioned travelers could be seen passing through said area at that very moment. Who could be seen as none other than aspiring young Pokémon trainer, Ash Ketchum, making his steady way down the long road he was currently treading along with his faithful partner, first Pokémon and trusted friend Pikachu perched atop his shoulder. Also traveling by the young hero's side was his beautiful and kind girlfriend Giselle Yuto, as well as close friends, Brockstone and Misty Waterflower. The four friends walked the long road that stretched far ahead of them with nothing but content and serene expressions on their faces, clearly enjoying the wonderful day it was shaping up to be. Most travelers, on the other hand, would most likely find the route the young trainers were traveling to be somewhat rugged, unused and ill-maintained. Thus, ruining any attempts those individuals would have at recognizing the beauty of the day. Ash and his friends could obviously care less about such trivial matters and simply took the true beauty out of the situation they were presented with. Unfortunately, the mostly unused, overgrown, wild-looking appearance of the route they were on was definitely clear and undeniable proof that it was not very popular among most travelers. One of the many reasons why this poorly maintained, out-of-the-way road was so undesirable to most people was for the simple fact that there were other ways to get to both Lavender Town and Saffron City, which were the very destinations the route in question eventually led to and also the same destinations Ash and the others were heading to currently. This, as most people would call it, undesirable, route took much longer to make it to both places than some of the shorter and more popular routes did, but the beautiful and awe-inspiring scenery more than made up for it in the eyes of Ash and his friends. This was not the case with the rest of the general traveling populace as previously stated though. In all truth, all sad truth that it is, many people in the current time were just too busy to stop and smell the roses as it were to ever take the time to go even 5 minutes out of their way. Much less a few days or even, Arceus forbid, weeks travel. In fact, if not for Professor Oak's many lectures on patience and taking the time to breath that Ash had been tutored on over the years, he would most likely have been the same way. Never stopping to admire something beautiful or unexpected and instead always rushing like a fool on fire towards his next gym badge with no real plan or strategy. Yet another subject of many that Ash made mental notes to thank the professor for later in life. Sometimes it literally made him cringe just thinking about how unprepared and disorganized he would have been on his journey if not for his meeting with Arceus at 5 years old, which revealed to him the true depth and importance of his destiny, and the years of rigorous training he went through with his mother and the kind old, yet still extremely spry, professor. For Ash it wasn't much of a stretch at all to believe just how big a laughingstock of a trainer he would have been otherwise, and that thought alone nearly gave him nightmares. Just thinking about how if all of Gary's immature taunts about him being a loser would have actually been true, just made the boy want to hurl. Even though Ash knew he was always a studious and focused child, always doing everything he did with the purpose of preparing himself for the day he became a Pokémon trainer, still, he felt certain that without his mother and Professor Oak, he would not have been even half as prepared for the oftentimes harsh reality of the real world as he was now. Sure, he had no doubts that he would have caught on eventually and wizened up a bit through much trial and error, but in Ash's view, why intentionally put yourself down the hard road filled with disappointment and failure when you can instead prepare yourself properly for something as extremely important and life-changing as starting your very own Pokémon journey? After all, Pokémon are living, breathing creatures that put all of their faith, well-being and hopes into the hands of their trainers. Not acting like the responsible trainer you have to be in order to raise Pokémon by not knowing how to properly raise and take care of them was just disgraceful in Ash's eyes. He honestly couldn't imagine promising his Pokémon that he could help them grow stronger and then not having the knowledge on how to do so. Trainers like that were not capable in his eyes to raise any Pokémon and needed to do some serious re-evaluating if they ever wanted to succeed as a Pokémon trainer. He knew he had a long way to go, but at least always learning and improving was far better than forever remaining clueless and doing everything half-assed while relying solely on guts and luck to succeed. Such reliances in his opinion were just foolish. A little luck and guts were fine, but a whole lot more than that was needed in the life of a trainer, and the young Ketchum knew this. But going back to the topic of the route they were currently on, a quick description of the surrounding area would be the most fitting. On the right side of the road was a dense forest that stretched for quite some ways until it came to the beginning of a large mountain range. To the left side of the road was also a forest, more jungle really, but much less dense and very near to the ocean, which was only a short walk away from where the group of friends were now. One could actually smell the salt air mixed in with the wild smells of the forest on the opposite side of the road, something that made for a very unique and pleasing scent combination. It still shocked the kids to see how both terrains on each side of the road, one slightly jungle-looking before it led to the ocean side and the other leading to lush mountains in the far distance, could be so close together but still fit so well in an odd way. Yet another miracle by Arceus. For the past 3 weeks, Ash and the others had traveled the scenic, mostly deserted route through much of the same type of terrain, which was primarily coastal, in a happy and mostly upbeat mood. Much like today in fact. They had spent a lot of time just enjoying each other's company and getting to know one another better, spending time with their Pokémon and in the case of Ash and Giselle, training themselves and their Pokémon even harder than usual. Being that Ash had increased their training intensity and time intervals yet again. The two had also spent a lot of time in the evenings just cuddling together, talking, laughing, kissing around the campfire and walking side by side every day with their hands intertwined tightly. Something which made both Brock and Misty jealous but for two completely different reasons. One wishing he had what Ash did with a girl while Misty merely desired to be in Giselle's position. Something that had also happened during the 3 weeks they had been traveling was the way, cooking dynamics, in the group had changed. Ash had really wanted to cook a meal one evening but Brock was initially unsure since he was the only one who ever cooked for everyone, including the Pokémon food. Of course, the squinty-eyed teen had to follow Ash's recipes for his Pokémon's strict diet but other than that, the eldest of the stone children thought up every recipe and cooked everything by himself. Ash had actually ended up challenging Brock to a cook-off of sorts for supper one evening, to which the other boy gladly had accepted, believing this was one thing that Ash couldn't possibly beat him in. After they had finished preparing their respective meals, both for their friends and the Pokémon, and placed them in front of Giselle, Misty and their Pokémon, they stood back and watched as everyone eagerly ate with gusto. After the food was finished, Brock had looked at them all anxiously, believing without a doubt that he had to have won. However, he was completely shocked when both girls and even the Pokémon honestly couldn't decide whose cooking was better, his or Ash's. They were both that good. The older boy knew that Ash's mother had trained him how to cook since she was very accomplished at food preparation herself, but he had no idea Delia was that great. He had made a mental note right then and there that when he saw Ash's mom again he would study her cooking habits closely so that he could hopefully polish up on his own culinary skills. Brock was surprised to be sure, but he had instantly begun seeing Ash in an entirely different light once he tried some of the food himself and found just how delicious it was. The only problem at that point was deciding who would continue making the food for all of them. Brock had offered the position to Ash out of kindness, but the younger boy had politely declined and said that they could share the duty from then on out. Brock was very happy with the decision and agreed immediately to the deal, gaining even more respect for Ash, who was being so kind and considerate of him and what he liked doing. They even ended up teaching each other some of the best recipes and cooking secrets they knew, both family secrets and recipes they had invented themselves. Misty and Giselle would frequently tease them and say that every time they cooked together it was like watching a really nerdy cooking channel, which drove both of them crazy. Their laughter never lasted long, however, because every time they teased them, Brock and Ash would shoot the giggling girls fierce glares and then swiftly remind them in perfect unison that the well-being and fullness of their stomachs, which by extension also meant their lives, was in their hands. This effectively ended the jokes and teasing anytime it came up. The two boys would then share high fives when the girls weren't looking and return merrily back to their cooking, feeling rather smug and proud of themselves for standing up for their male cooking rights, as it were. Going back to the present though, as Ash continued to walk and mull over that particular funny memory in his head, he felt Giselle squeeze his hand tighter and he looked over at her. "What's wrong, Giselle?" he asked, concerned. The brunette just shook her head. "Nothing's wrong, Ash, I was just thinking." She then trailed off. The boy quirked his eyebrow. "Thinking about what?" Giselle smiled at him. "You have 9 badges after the last 2 gyms we went to." You qualify for the Pokémon League now, you know, she told him with clear happiness in her voice for her boyfriend. The young trainer looked back towards the road again and let a smile come across his face. I sure did, huh? I still can't believe it. He lamented while slipping off into his memories again and thinking some more over the past 3 weeks they had been traveling. Flashback. XXXXXXXXXXX. The first week after he and his friends left Emerald Town, home of the Maiden's Peak and one of Ash's most memorable adventures for many years to come, they came across another coastal town named Windy Cliffs Village on the 7th day of traveling. This particular community, which was situated atop a chain of connected large cliffs overlooking the ocean, was the site of Ash's 8th gym match. The town definitely lived up to its namesake because at such high elevations and being so near the ocean, the small community was constantly being blasted by strong, high winds that took Ash and his friends by surprise when they first arrived. This was something that they had, unfortunately, learned the hard way. Upon arriving at the town, a strong gust of wind had blown through the area, nearly knocking the companions off their feet. Giselle had been in front of Ash since she was so excited at seeing as much of the new town as she could right away and unfortunately had been the target of the cruel wind's sick humor. The strong gust of wind had blown Giselle's white skirt up to her lower back, giving everyone behind her a very clear view of a pair of cherry red panties that, for anyone who wasn't blind, could plainly see definitely shouldn't be worn by a girl her age. This event caused Misty to blush red and look away, Brock's jaw to drop and start gushing blood from his nose, Pikachu to look confused at what the big deal was and Ash to turn a shade of red that would have made a Darmanitan that wasn't in Zen mode proud. The boy had instantly rushed to his girlfriend's aid and quickly pulled her skirt back down so no one else could see it and humiliate her any further. All the while looking back and giving a death glare to Brock that had clearly screamed, "Say anything and you're dead." There had been no one around fortunately, but Giselle was still beyond humiliated. Luckily though, after some calming words and soothing affection from Ash, beating Brock down for being a gawking pervert and arguing with Misty for telling her she got what she deserved for wearing such short skirts, she overcame her embarrassment and made the smart decision to wear a pair of jeans that she had packed away for the rest of the time they were in the area. After her incident of embarrassment had ended, the friends then made their way to the reason they had traveled to the wind-beaten town in the first place, and that was because it had its own Pokémon gym. One of which was located atop the highest cliff in the area and actually looked like a big, fancy, well-made beach hut. The battling field had been out back of the gym and was suspended atop a large platform that hung out over top of the cliff the gym was situated on, which was held in place by large supports that jutted out of the cliff side and attached to the underside of every corner of the platform. The entire battlefield was completely open on every side, which led to a chance of the battling Pokémon falling off and plummeting to the ocean far, far below. As it turned out however, the reason for the battlefield being the way it was all had to do with the type of gym it was. Ash had studied up extensively on the gym and its leader while he formulated some battle strategies, and in that time he found out all he needed to know. The gym specialized in flying-type Pokémon, hence the reason for the suspended battlefield over the cliff side, and the leader's name was Kita. He was a boy a little older than Brock and had been working with flying types since he was young. He was physically a lean young man with a sharp face, similar to a bird's, and had dirty blonde hair that was long on the top, slicked forward all in one direction and came over his forehead like the brim of a cap. The boy wore a pair of jean overalls, white undershirt, brown forearm gloves for handling flying Pokémon and brown work boots. After meeting with the gym leader and having his challenge accepted, Ash decided to use for the battle both of his own flying types, Fearow and Pidgeotto, sending Bulbasaur and Squirtle back to the lab temporarily so he could have them. The battle itself was, for lack of a better word, fast-paced and very agility-based. A match between two teams of very well-trained flying types in a battle to prove which team was superior to the other. The first battle had been between Kita's Fearow and Ash's own Fearow. In terms of speed, agility and flight maneuverability, both of them seemed to be evenly matched at first. Both Pokémon, since they were Fearow and extremely dominant types, went at each other as hard and fast as they could the entire battle. Sometimes Kita's Fearow would gain the upper wing, and at other times Ash's Fearow would gain the advantage and deliver a good barrage of attacks. More than once they would become locked up in a fierce grappling bout with both of them using their beaks, talons and even wings to try and do damage to the other. At one point, both trainers Fearow were locked up in an intense battle while they went diving through the air from the sky above. Kita's Fearow managed to shift its position to be on top of Ash's Fearow just before they hit the ground, which led to Ash's own being slammed into the battlefield. His friends had cringed and called out to Fearow in worry, afraid that the Pokémon was done for, but Ash had just stood where he was with his arms crossed and a stoic look on his face. Much to everyone's surprise, when the dust cloud had finally settled, it showed Fearow standing on its feet with its wings spread out, looking pissed off and ready to go again with a vengeance. Ash had merely smirked and then commanded Fearow to return the favor. Fearow listened without hesitation and instantly took off on its feet far faster than anything Kita had ever seen before out of a flying type. Fearow had also added some agility to his run as he shot off the ground like a rocket straight towards the other Fearow who was just hovering in the air, looking shocked that the other bird was still battle-ready after the harsh ground smash he had endured. Not to mention the fact that he could also run on the ground, something which had further shocked Kita's Fearow since it knew it definitely couldn't do such a thing. Kita had then ordered his Pokémon to use agility followed by Drill Peck and then charged towards Ash's Fearow as a counter. Both Pokémon flew at each other in the air with determination on their faces. Ash's Fearow flying from down low and Kita's from up above. The Pokémon were nearly upon each other when Ash had suddenly commanded his Fearow to use Air Cutter right when he was almost upon his opponent, followed by a quick barrel roll to the side to avoid the collision. Just before both Pokémon collided together, Ash's Fearow suddenly launched his attack right in the face of the other bird and then folded his wings in before rolling to the side quickly. Kita's Fearow stopped mid-flight and tried to avoid the blades of wind but couldn't move in time and ended up getting sliced into painfully by the attack. Ash didn't leave any time for rest as he had then commanded his Fearow to use another Air Cutter followed by agility, backed up by another charge at the other Fearow. Ash's Fearow performed the attack combo instantly and had shot off towards the other one in a blur. Kita tried to warn his Pokémon to move and dodge but it was too shaken up and hurt by the previous attack to think quickly enough as the next barrage of Air Cutter came faster than it could even blink. While the opposing Pokémon tried desperately to avoid as many of the air blades as it could, Ash's Fearow flew towards it at incredible speeds. He then collided with the other Fearow in mere seconds and began driving both of them towards the ground. Ash had then shouted up to his Pokémon to wrap his wings and feet around the other Fearow and increase their descent speed with agility. Kita had no idea what Ash was up to with such a dangerous command and ordered his own Fearow to try and fight to get free. His Pokémon couldn't do anything however because its feet and wings were pinned right down to its side by Ash's Fearow, making it completely immobile. Ash then commanded his Fearow to do something that shocked everyone. He ordered him to stick his beak into the other Fearow's mouth and use Drill Peck while picking up the speed. No one understood this strategy but Fearow listened anyway. He had simply smacked his opponent hard on top of the head with his own and raked his talons down the other flying type's soft underbelly as part of his attack. Kita's Fearow screeched in pain and the other one didn't waste a second before sticking his beak into his kin's now open mouth, initiating Drill Peck right after. The effect of this move was instantaneous. As soon as Ash's Fearow began the attack, the incredibly fast spinning movement of Drill Peck did something that no one was prepared for as it started turning both Pokémon's bodies in an extremely fast circle while they plummeted to the battlefield below. Both Fearow looking like a spinning mass of brown and white feathers as they did so. Ash had then shouted up to his Fearow to try and focus on one point and center his mind so he didn't get too dizzy as he fell in the free spinning circle. He did so and just before the Pokémon collided with the ground, Ash ordered his own Pokémon to untangle himself from the other Fearow and use his feet to shove off hard from his opponent. Fearow had obeyed beautifully and did just that. He quickly untangled himself and pushed off of the other Fearow seconds before colliding with the ground. Kita's Fearow was so dizzy and disoriented from the fall and the spin that it couldn't do anything to stop its descent towards the ground, even as its trainer kept yelling up at it to do something to right itself. In a matter of seconds, Kita's Fearow impacted with the battlefield, cratering the ground and causing a dust cloud to shoot up into the air. Ash's Fearow quickly descended towards Ash's side of the field and landed in front of him nimbly. When the smoke settled in the middle of the field, it had showed Kita's Fearow out cold with swirls in its eyes. The next battle had been between Kita's Golbat and Ash's Pidgeotto. This particular battle was different from the previous one with both Fearows because it wasn't so much based on speed and agility as it was strategy and tactics. Golbat was nowhere near as fast as Pidgeotto, but what it lacked in speed it made up for in its cunning attacks and status-effective moves. Pidgeotto was able to get a few hits in on the bat Pokémon with moves like Quick Attack and Air Cutter by utilizing her very impressive speed and agility, but Golbat was able to dodge many of the attacks by using moves like Haze to take cover and Supersonic to try and throw Pidgeotto off of her rhythm due to needing to dodge the confusion-inducing move. Pidgeotto had managed to fake Golbat however out at one point and did manage to get a solid hit in with a well-placed air slash. The attack threw the poison, flying type for a loop, and while it was trying to right itself, Ash had commanded Pidgeotto to fly in close and use another air slash attack. Right before Pidgeotto was able to make contact however, Kita ordered Golbat to use Supersonic at the last minute. Ash's Pokémon was too close to evade the attack unfortunately and ended up getting hit head-on with it. Pidgeotto had then instantly became confused and lost control of her wings as she fell down towards the ground. Kita took advantage of the situation and ordered Golbat to fly in and use its own air slash on the descending bird Pokémon. Golbat flew down quickly and came right underneath of Pidgeotto and attacked her hard with air slash, knocking the female Pokémon for a painful spin and sending her careening towards the ground before smashing into it. Ash had narrowed his eyes at the attack but kept his arms crossed as he watched the dust cloud fade away. When it did, it showed Pidgeotto standing back up, looking a little scuffed up and still confused as she teetered around back and forth. Kita had quickly commanded his Pokémon to use Leech Life and Golbat flew in towards Pidgeotto. Ash knew that his Pokémon wasn't able to do anything at the moment because of her confusion and could only watch as Golbat landed beside Pidgeotto and sunk its fangs into her as it started sapping energy out of her. After it had sucked enough energy from Pidgeotto, the bat Pokémon slapped her away with a wing attack on its trainer's command, sending her skidding away across the battlefield. Kita quickly ordered his Pokémon to use Air Cutter on Pidgeotto while she was down to end the battle. Golbat then thrust its wings forward and sent many sharp blades of wind at her, intent on taking her out. Ash had at that moment looked to Pidgeotto and called out calmly but firmly that he needed her to snap out of her confusion and evade the attack. He knew she could do it and believed in her with no questions. This managed to get through to Pidgeotto and she snapped out of her confused state just before the blades of wind could reach her. She quickly barrel rolled to the side on her wings and then, using the anger and frustration she had at Golbat for confusing her, shot forward at blurring speeds after she had regained her footing. The bird was like a bullet as she flew towards Golbat with a fierce look on her face. Kita had swiftly commanded Golbat to use Sludge Bomb and stop Pidgeotto, but she just started using agility while she flew in, zigzagging every poisonous projectile that came her way. She made it to Golbat the very next instant and bashed the Pokémon across the face twice with each of her wings and then head smashed the bat down into the ground. She had then hopped back and thrust her wings forward, churning up a strong twister attack that sucked Golbat up into its funnel and beat it around viciously before spitting the Pokémon out of its swirling confines, tossing the energy-sucking leech into the ground like a stone. Pidgeotto didn't rest and took off again at Golbat, who had been struggling badly by that point to get back up. Kita knew his Pokémon was in trouble but saw that Golbat was too exhausted to make any quick maneuvers. He thought of the next best thing, and just as Pidgeotto was nearly on top of Golbat again with her wings beginning to thrust forward in the sign of the finishing attack, Kita ordered his Golbat to use Toxic. Just as Pidgeotto thrust her wings forward and launched a fearsome air cutter at her foe, the soon-to-be doomed dual-type Pokémon opened its mouth and then spat a dark ball of sludge at Pidgeotto. The two attacks struck at the same time and Golbat was sent tumbling back across the field towards its trainer while screeching in pain as the blades of wind cut through it. By the time it finally rolled up to Kita's feet, it was unquestionably unconscious. Pidgeotto could not dodge the sludge in time since her wings were still out however and was struck head-on with the foul substance due to that. The force was enough to send her skidding backwards across the field towards Ash while the poison took its effect. Once she had finally came to a stop and regained her senses a little bit, the female Pokémon slowly stood back to her feet and was instantly stricken by the poison that was at that point coursing rapidly through her system. She fell forward again and caught herself with her wings as she slowly righted herself and then started breathing in and out slowly to calm her heart rate. Ash had instructed her and all of his other Pokémon during training to do this so that if they were ever poisoned, it wouldn't get pumped through their bloodstream too quickly, as she stood as tall and proud as she could. That had ended the second battle, but the last and hardest one came next. Kita's last Pokémon had been none other a large and impressive-looking Pidgeot that stood strong and towering over top of the battle-winded Pidgeotto, a confident smirk on its beaked face. Ash was originally going to return Pidgeotto and use Fearow since she was so battle-worn and poisoned on top of it all. However, Pidgeotto had declined firmly and made it clearly known to Ash that she wanted to battle regardless of how tired she may have been. Ash had faith in his Pokémon and agreed to let her battle with Pidgeot. The battle was, for the most part, almost a complete outmatch the entire time. Even though Pidgeotto was incredibly well trained and strong, Pidgeot was her final evolved form and was physically stronger and faster than she was. She wasn't able to get even so much as one hit in on Pidgeot the entire time and was slowed down even more by her poisoned state. Every time she would try to use an attack of some kind and would come even remotely close to scathing Pidgeot, she would be frozen in place by the poison that was coursing through her system. This would just give Pidgeot another chance to attack her and cause more damage. Ash knew that things were looking really bad for Pidgeotto, but he had faith in her and believed that she could pull out the win no matter what. During one particular instance where Pidgeot met her head-on in the air and slammed into her with an aerial ace hard enough to send her crashing into the battlefield, cratering it in the process, she had struggled incredibly hard to stand back to her feet after. Ash had taken this time to encourage her and told her that no matter what, he believed that she could come out of the spot she was in and win. He believed in her and her abilities. He said that all of the training they did every day and all of the mental strengthening exercises he put her and the others through all this time was for the very situation she was in now. He told her that the pain and the feelings of hopelessness she was feeling was nothing more than a mind game, and that if she wanted to come out on top as the winner, she could do it if she just told herself she could and truly believed it. He told her that if she refused to fall and lose the battle, then she wouldn't. Everything was all just a mind game, and that her success and abilities were entirely dependent on how much control she had over her mind. Pidgeotto had let this truly awaken her inner fire and determination. Despite the immense pain and exhaustion she had been feeling at that moment, she let her trainer's words that reached down to her very soul, fire her up and unleash all the strength and power she had within her. She had then stood up and screeched out loudly in defiance as the poison tried to course through her again and immobilize her body. She envisioned her victory, she felt her inner power, and in that moment she took complete control of her mind and put everything else aside except for the one and only thought that was passing through her mind at that moment, and that one thought was to win no matter what. She had stared Pidgeot down with a look of pure fire in her eyes as she spread her wings out imposingly and screeched at it before shooting off towards the other bird at speeds that should not have been possible for a Pokémon that was so damaged and poisoned on top of it all. Pidgeot had recovered from its shock though and took off at its opponent with the same impressive speed that it had been demonstrating all battle long. Both Pokémon then clashed together in a blur of talons, feathers and beaks. Pidgeotto fought its evolved form like a Pokémon possessed, with a fury that had shocked not just Kita and Ash's friends but also Pidgeot itself, because, even though it was stronger than Pidgeotto, she had somehow begun getting the advantage on it in the battle. More and more attacks she started landing on Pidgeot, and even though the poison in her system kept trying to stop her, she wouldn't let it. Kita had ordered for his Pokémon to break away from the enraged and madly attacking Pidgeotto, but it couldn't. Every time it tried, Pidgeotto would just sink her talons into its skin and dig in tightly while she continued to beat at Pidgeot with her wings and beak. Kita had commanded his Pokémon to use anything it knew in order to get free from Pidgeotto, and it listened as it started flying around all over the battlefield in crazy directions, using its beak to stab at Pidgeotto and anything else it could think of to get free. Ash didn't want to lose the momentum they had gained though, and ordered Pidgeotto to dig her talons as deep into Pidgeot as she could and peck at its eyes. His Pokémon was relentless and merciless as she did as told and dug her talons into Pidgeot's body deeper, making the Pokémon screech in pain while she poked at its eyes with her beak. It looked as though she was really aiming to take out Pidgeot's eyes, but it was more of a distraction than anything else. She hadn't really been trying to blind the bigger bird at all. Pidgeot continuously dodged the pecks and beat on Pidgeotto as hard as it could with its wings and beak. However, no matter how hard and how much it bashed on Pidgeotto, she just wouldn't let up. She was in the zone and she wasn't stopping. It had been at that moment that Ash had suddenly had an idea form in his head that he knew would assure he and Pidgeotto the victory. Following through on his plan, he had then commanded Pidgeotto to fly herself and Pidgeot towards the ocean below the battlefield as fast as she could. Pidgeotto sunk her talons into Pidgeot further and then, with a massive upheaval of strength that came from Arceus only knew where, shot down towards the ocean with Pidgeot in tow. She quickly angled herself until she was on top of the other Pokémon and pressed down with all of her might as she drove them towards the water far below. Kita had no idea what Ash was planning but knew that if his Pokémon hit the water, it was over. Pidgeot couldn't swim and would have had to forfeit the battle. However, he knew there was also no way that Pidgeotto could swim either, so Kita had no idea why Ash issued the command he did, aside from some form of desperate attempt not to just outright lose. That question was answered just moments later. However, Pidgeot was unable to break free from Pidgeotto's grasp no matter how hard it tried to, even with the shouts of encouragement from its trainer. Both flying types then hit the churning waters below with a huge splash, disappearing below the surface instantly. Ash, Kita and the others had ran to the edge of the battlefield and peered over the edge, searching for any sign of them. Pidgeot had just risen from under the water and was flailing around madly, trying desperately to free itself from the water and get to dry land. Pidgeotto, however, just calmly rose up out of the water and, to Kito's astounded surprise, swam towards Pidgeot with her wings at a fast speed before attacking the Pokémon viciously again. Pidgeot could do nothing to stop the beating it was currently enduring and could only try staying afloat as best as it could while the waves continuously pummeled the completely out of element flying type. Kita had known in that moment that Ash and Pidgeotto had them beat, since there was no way his Pidgeot could fight an aquatic battle against another flying Pokémon that had somehow learned how to fight, quite well at that, in the water. It was with that decision made up in his mind that Kita threw in the towel and admitted defeat to the referee of the gym, forfeiting the match. After the exhausted and frightened Pidgeot had been returned to the safety of its Pokeball way up on the battlefield platform above, Ash had then called down to Pidgeotto to see if she could make it back up or not. The female bird Pokémon was too stubborn and proud to be returned to her Pokeball and instead had just squawked in insistence that she could make it back up on her own. She merely jumped up out of the water and, using her wings to twist herself, spun around in fast circles until her wings were dry enough to fly. Once she was able to, Pidgeotto made the long and exhausting, at least exhausting in her current condition, trip back up to the battlefield while Ash watched her carefully. Eventually, after much panting and fighting off more painful attacks of the poison coursing through her, Pidgeotto made it to the top and then landed heavily on the ground. She had been breathing heavily and looked as though her whole body was aching, a grimace of pain etched across her features. Ash had been worried for his Pokémon's well-being and started to make his way over to her quickly, ignoring the fact that he had won the gym battle and being only concerned for her health. However, before he could make it to her, Pidgeotto threw her wings out to the sides and stood up tall and proud as she raised her head up and started loudly calling her name. Obviously very proud of the fact that she had managed to defeat her evolved form, especially when poisoned and already tired from the previous battle against Golbat. She had continued to call out loudly with fire in her eyes until suddenly, her whole body had begun glowing a bright bluish-white as she started to morph and change shape. Ash and the others then watched on in amazement and, if you were Ash himself, pride as Pidgeotto began to evolve. The crown of feathers on her head grew out long until it came down past her back, her wingspan grew to much greater lengths and her entire body as a whole grew much larger. When the evolution was finally complete, the newly evolved Pokémon had spread her wings up into the air as the light burst away from her and she called her new name loudly to the sky. Everyone then stared in awe as the newly evolved Pidgeot displayed herself proudly for them all to see, a look of pride, elegance and grace now exuding from her in an even greater degree than they did before. All of the previous fatigue and even poisoned status condition she had suffered from as a Pidgeotto was gone as she now looked completely healthy. After Ash had hugged, praised and congratulated Pidgeot on not just winning the match for him but also evolving, which could only mean even tougher training from there on out for her, he returned his second fully evolved flying type and then had his post-battle words with Kita. The older boy had congratulated Ash for his off-the-wall strategies, amazing battle tactics and the obviously unorthodox but very effective methods of training he must have had his Pokémon undergo if seeing Pidgeotto, or rather Pidgeot as she was now, swim and battle in the water was any clue at all. He then presented Ash with the avian badge. The badge was a perfect rectangle in shape with a V emblazoned upon it. The V itself was a dark pink in color while the area around the letter was more of a lighter pink. Upon receiving the new badge and adding it to his case, Ash had then looked at all 8 of his hard-earned badges. The Boulder Badge, Cascade Badge, Aptitude Badge, Thunder Badge, Cunning Badge, Reflex Badge, Nature Badge and the newly acquired Avian Badge. He could hardly believe in that moment that he now had the required 8 gym badges needed to compete in the Indigo Conference and that, on top of it all, it had only taken him a few months into the beginning of his journey to do so. It had just seemed so surreal for him that he was now officially able to enter into the tournament he had always wanted to be in from the time he was young and had been watching the battles on TV, and he still had months until the next conference to prepare for it. Ash was definitely happy with his accomplishments and felt proud of himself and his Pokémon, there was no doubt at all about that. However, he wouldn't let any of those accomplishments get to his head and especially wouldn't let it happen to his Pokémon. He knew they still had many things they needed to work on and learn and that's why he felt even more resolute at that moment to travel all throughout Kanto and earn every badge there was alongside his Pokémon to get stronger and stronger. One could never get enough experience and training and he knew this. When Kita found out that Ash, upon earning the Avian Badge, had the last one he needed for entrance into the league and recovered from the shock of discovering just how little of an amount of time it took him to earn all 8, he had congratulated the other trainer and said that he was very happy his gym was the last one standing in Ash's way of his 8th and final badge, an honor that Kita's gym was very rarely ever fortunate enough to have since it was so out of the way. He was further surprised when Ash told him that he was actually going to try to challenge and win every gym badge there was in Kanto but ultimately wished him luck and said that he would be rooting for Ash every step of the way. After thanking Kita and sharing their parting words, Ash and his friends then headed to the town Pokémon Center and stayed the night before heading out the following day for their next destination. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX down the coast at a town that was actually located on the beach and was squeezed in between two large gorges. The seaside community, called Tide Town, was not very large since it was literally fitted in between the two large ravines, which put everything fairly close together. The buildings and houses were all made similar to the way Kita's gym was constructed back in Windy Cliffs Village, and was actually a good thing since the beach hut-style houses sat perfectly on the sand, making a perfectly stable foundation on the loose ground that made up the beach's terrain. During the few days that Ash and the others had been traveling between towns, the raven-haired trainer took as much time as he could to work with his newly evolved Pidgeot. He had returned Firo the day after his gym battle with Kita so he could have Bulbasaur back, but as he promised her after the gym battle had ended, Ash wanted to help his Pokémon increase her training so as to allow her to continue gaining newer and greater levels of strength. The only way to do this was to keep increasing Pidgeot's training load with each new level she attained, that way nothing ever became easier for her. Still though, even with Pidgeot having finally reached her final stage of evolution, Ash couldn't take her training to the level he truly wanted her to just yet. Pidgeot, along with his other Pokémon, were just too young to handle any training that went too far into the spectrum of extreme, or otherwise, since their still maturing bodies would most likely break under the stress. Because of this, the only things Ash could do to increase Pidgeot's training level was to up the amount of her leg weights for her ground training, water weights for aquatic drills, and also her wing weights for all of the intense aerial training she did with Firo back at the ranch. He also increased the intensity, duration and time intervals of every aspect of her training. Move training, physical conditioning, battle strategy and combat drills against Firo. All in all, by the time he sent her back in return for Squirtle, he felt very confident that she had more than enough to work on where her training was concerned to keep her well off for quite some time. But going back to the current topic of focus, the Pokémon gym of Tide Town was located right on the beach near the waterside and looked much like a big surf shop. Of course, this was probably due to the fact that the gym also doubled as an actual surf shop at the same time. The gym leader's name had been Devin, and he was the very definition of the term, beach bum. He was around his early 20s and had long brown hair that was done up in dreadlocks at certain places. He obviously didn't shave much because his whole face was covered in rough, patchy stubble, and his appearance generally looked to be the one of a person who was totally laid back and calm about pretty much everything. He wore baggy tan shorts and flip-flops on his feet, a sea blue tank top, a Gyarados tooth necklace, and a leather bracelet on his right wrist. The man even spoke with the tone of someone who had baked far too long in the sun. He specialized in water-type Pokémon, like Misty, and after greeting one another the standard 3-on-3 gym battle began. Ash had decided to switch his Pokémon out once again and decided on the lineup of his Squirtle, Staryu and Krabby, sending Charmander and Ghastly back in return. The first match had been between Squirtle and Devin's Wartortle. Even though Wartortle technically had the advantage over Squirtle since it was the evolved form of the latter, Ash knew that little issue would be completely null and void in this battle. Squirtle was more than a challenge for Wartortle with the intense training he did on a regular basis, so Ash wasn't worried. His confidence wasn't unfounded either. The entire battle was mostly a powerhouse match between both of the same species Pokémon as they went at each other as hard and with as much power as they could. Devin honestly was baffled by the sheer power and strength Squirtle had behind all of his water attacks when it was compared to his own Wartortle, who of which was supposed to be stronger automatically because of the evolutionary advantage. However, Squirtle was able to stand toe-to-toe with Wartortle the entire match. For most of the battle they were evenly matched, with Squirtle landing a few hits on Wartortle and the latter connecting its own strikes on its pre-evolved cousin. At one point Wartortle managed to hit Squirtle with a rapid spin, followed up by a strong water pulse which had sent Ash's Pokémon sliding across the concrete battle platform which was located outside the shop gym on the beach. Wartortle had taken advantage of this and began unleashing a barrage of different attacks on Squirtle that the still-dazed Pokémon had a tough time dodging and ended up taking quite a few of them. Ash had known that his Pokémon was in trouble, and after assessing the situation for a few moments he quickly formulated the perfect strategy to take Wartortle down with. Right at the time Wartortle launched another strong water pulse at Squirtle, Ash commanded his Pokémon to take the attack head-on but retract into his shell and bounce off of the ground just before the attack could hit. Squirtle did just that, and right as the blast of water hit him he withdrew into his shell and bounced off the ground. The water launched Squirtle high up into the air, making Wartortle, Devin and Ash's friends have to squint in order to see his form, which was silhouetted against the sun's bright backdrop. Ash then commanded his Pokémon to use his newly learned Bubble Beam on the grounded Wartortle far below. Squirtle listened and unleashed a mass of bubbles down towards the ground, which surrounded the bigger turtle and made visibility a near impossibility because of it. On the way down into his descent, Ash ordered Squirtle to use a combination of water pulse and rapid spin on Wartortle as he neared it. Squirtle did just that, and the large volume of water he expelled, boosted by the speed of rapid spin, connected with Wartortle down below and caused the Pokémon to root itself to the ground in order to avoid getting knocked off of its feet. Ash then commanded Squirtle to concentrate the speed of his rapid spin into the hardest head smash he could. With the bubbles still everywhere and Wartortle being off balance, Devin knew his Pokémon couldn't effectively dodge the attack and instead ordered it to withdraw into its shell and protect itself from the impact. Ash had smirked at this, and right before Squirtle came close to making contact he commanded his Pokémon to break rapid spin and use water pulse on the ground right under Wartortle. Squirtle did this, much to the confusion of everyone watching, and the blast of water temporarily knocked Wartortle's shell upright until it was standing on its end. Ash then ordered Squirtle to stick his arms out and land on the top of Wartortle's currently upright shell with his hands. Squirtle focused hard and, using as much control as he could, stuck the downward landing on Wartortle's shell. He was, at that point, in a handstand on top of Wartortle's shell, looking down into the hole of where the hiding Pokémon's head would be. Ash then commanded Squirtle to quickly switch hand positions until he was suspended behind where Wartortle's head would be, and then had him use water pulse directly inside of the shell. Squirtle did so, and after just a few seconds of blasting water down into the shell, Wartortle's head popped out looking dazed, slightly drowned even though it was a water type, and out of breath. Ash was on the opportunity in a heartbeat and had ordered Squirtle to quickly turn around, wrap his tail around Wartortle's neck and then fall backwards off of his opponent while twisting to the side. Squirtle had quickly did as told and turned around as he wrapped his tail around Wartortle's neck and dropped off of the shell he was perched on. He twisted to the side as he hit the ground and tightened his tail's grip on Wartortle's neck, making said Pokémon gasp for air and go bug-eyed. Ash then ordered Squirtle, who was on his back behind Wartortle, to lock his small legs around the other Pokémon's neck, over top of his tail, and then tighten his grip even more. Squirtle obeyed and upon locking Wartortle up in a grip it couldn't escape from, started pulling back as hard as he could on his opponent's neck with his tail, all while cinching everything down with his legs, essentially making a mutated version of a standard choke hold. Wartortle couldn't break the tight and extremely unusual hold on its neck and started struggling and gasping for air as Squirtle pulled back harder and harder. Devin could only watch in sick fascination as his Pokémon was literally being choked out of the battle before his very eyes. Once Wartortle began turning a shade of blue much darker than it normally was and stopped struggling, Devin knew it was over and threw in the towel so his Pokémon didn't get hurt. After Ash had congratulated and hugged Squirtle for such a great, hard-fought battle, he returned him and then prepared for the next battle, which was between his Krabby and Devin's Poliwhirl. The man was surprised at first upon seeing such a large Krabby but ultimately recovered from his shock and began the battle. For the most part, Devin's Poliwhirl was a heavy hitter that relied more on physical attacks it knew rather than water-type attacks. Krabby on the other hand was well trained from the regimen Ash had him following back at the lab in just about everything. His speed was, surprisingly enough for a Krabby, equal to Poliwhirl's because of all of the intense weighted speed exercises Ash had him do. His already very hard shell skin was even harder from all of the body hardening he did and could be increased even further by the use of Harden. This was how he had managed to withstand it whenever Poliwhirl would manage to connect with some of its powerful physical attacks like Mega Punch, Mega Kick and Headbutt. Krabby's attacks themselves were very powerful and not only from the intense move training it did but also because of its technical status as a giant Pokémon. Its body was not only enhanced in size but its physical makeup on the cellular and muscular level made its attacks much stronger than other Krabby of regular size. Basically the same situation as with Dragonite and Tentacruel. That was how most of the battle went between the two water types. Ash's Pokémon would sneak in a few attacks here and there with its abnormal speed and Poliwhirl would occasionally manage to connect with Krabby using some of its brute force attacks, only causing minimal damage due to both Krabby's extreme training and size increased defense. It was obvious that neither Devin nor his Pokémon were used to dealing with the strength and unique abilities of a giant Pokémon, that much was easy to tell from the battle. Even Ash was shocked with Krabby's enhanced battling prowess that came from, again, not just his training but also his size. He knew that giant Pokémon had many physical enhancements due to their size but he didn't know it would be the same way for Krabby, who wasn't anywhere near the size of Dragonite or Tentacruel. Eventually though, Poliwhirl was able to box Krabby in and then started hammering away on his rock-hard skin with moves like Mega Punch, Mega Kick, Dynamic Punch and a move that really affected Krabby, Ice Punch. Poliwhirl struck Krabby with an ice-encased fist and froze the spot of skin it connected with. Poliwhirl then struck that same patch of skin with another punch and managed to hurt the skin there, making Krabby wince in pain and stumble backward. Poliwhirl performed this routine a couple more times and managed to do some damage to Krabby before hitting him again and sending him back towards Ash. The boy in question had been studying Poliwhirl's battle tactics for a while and had managed to formulate a strategy during that time he believed would work in taking it down. After Krabby managed to recover from the fierce barrage it had taken, Ash ordered him to switch battle strategies and start using evasive tactics. Krabby had merely nodded in understanding and then went to work putting the new strategy info effect. The crab Pokémon had then began jumping and moving to several different spots on the battlefield every time Poliwhirl would rush in to attack him. He never met his opponent head-on with any attacks and instead chose to just dodge and move away from every attack thrown his way with a nimbleness that surprised everyone but Ash. What really surprised everyone however, was when Ash commanded Krabby to come down out of every jump he was in and use moves like stomp on the concrete floor as hard as he could. Both the downward force of gravity that propelled Krabby at quick speeds and the heavy mass in which he was carrying around as a giant Pokémon proved to be a very destructive combination. This meant that every time Krabby would land he would crack the area of concrete floor around him. Poliwhirl would then come chasing after him and either jump onto the same spot or strike it with a powerful physical attack that would completely shatter the already weakened concrete, exposing the bare sand beneath. Both Pokémon repeated this process over and over again with an irritated Poliwhirl chasing relentlessly after Krabby. Since it obviously wasn't very adept at any other move except for its physical strength ones, it had to chase Krabby down if it wanted to attack him. This was a very exhausting process for Devon's Pokémon as it clearly didn't have the same level of physical conditioning training that Ash's Pokémon had. After some time of repeating the same boring process, at least boring for anyone watching, practically the entire battlefield was destroyed, leaving nothing but extremely torn up sandy ground in its place. There were huge craters, indents, hazardous-looking pits and uneven patches in the battle-torn sand that made moving and jumping around much more difficult. With next to no concrete left, the sand having left huge craters behind in it and Poliwhirl not being nearly as light on its feet as Krabby, Devon's Pokémon found itself having a very hard time moving around without getting tripped up by the uneven terrain. Krabby was having no problems at all since not only was he lighter on his feet but his legs were also much smaller than Poliwhirl's. Meaning that whenever he landed on the sand, his thin and stick-like feet would just slide into the loose ground like a pin. He was then able to easily jump up again and move to the next location without difficulty. Poliwhirl however had more trunk-like legs than Krabby had and would sink into the cratered sand holes, nearly causing it to trip over. Everything became even harder for Poliwhirl whenever Ash ordered Krabby to start using Bubble Beam on the entire area of sand that was now currently acting as the battlefield. Since the bubbles were made of water and the sand absorbed said substance, after a few minutes of Krabby performing this action the entire battleground started to resemble a mucky, mud-like marsh. Then, every time Poliwhirl would land in the sand its feet would sink down into the muddy ground with a plop, and would cause the frog-like Pokémon to struggle desperately to free itself. Krabby yet again had no problems moving because of his nimbleness and the shape of his legs. He just kept jumping around the battlefield while using Bubble Beam to make the sand around them even muckier and harder to move in. Both Devon and Ash's friends were beyond confused as to why Ash had his Pokémon do what he did, but eventually, they saw why. During one of the occasions where Poliwhirl became stuck in the mucky and wet sand, it was so exhausted from constantly trying to attack Krabby and all of the fighting it had been doing to free itself time and time again from the harsh terrain, that it struggled harder than it ever had before at trying to get free from the sopping ground. Ash had seen his chance since Poliwhirl was exhausted and then commanded Krabby to jump up into the air again and use Stomp on Poliwhirl. Krabby was in action not a second later and jumped into the air, bringing his foot up as he descended towards Poliwhirl at fast speeds. Devon knew his Pokémon was in trouble and had tried to command Poliwhirl to do something to avoid the sure-to-be damaging attack, but Poliwhirl was almost completely exhausted from struggling against the sand for so long and couldn't react in time. The gym leader could only watch as Krabby came down on top of Poliwhirl's face with a high-powered stomp attack so hard that the other water type's head snapped to the side and its legs slightly buckled from the force of the strike. Krabby landed on Poliwhirl's shoulders and gripped onto his opponent tightly with his pincers. Ash smirked and then had quickly ordered his Pokémon to start hammering his claws down on top of Poliwhirl as hard as he could. Devon wasn't quick enough to issue any kind of defensive maneuver because at that very moment, Krabby used Harden on his pincers to make them pack even more force. He had then brought them up above his head before slamming them down on top of Poliwhirl's head, face, shoulders and any other area of his opponent's body that he could reach. Poliwhirl had only been able to cry out in pain with every strike that Krabby ruthlessly assaulted it with. The extra hardened pincers, massive strength and oversized mass that Krabby possessed only made each hit that much more intense. Finally, Krabby brought both pincers up into the air and then swung them down hard onto Poliwhirl's head. As soon as the attack made connection, Poliwhirl's eyes slightly bugged out and its knees completely buckled. Krabby leaned forward onto the other water type and then vaulted off of Poliwhirl as he landed some distance away in front of Ash, pincers still up and ready for battle. It wasn't needed however because just 1 minute later, Poliwhirl started teetering back and forth on its feet before falling backwards onto the wet sand with swirls in its eyes, showing the battle was over as the Pokémon began sinking ever so slowly into the wet, mucky sand. Devon had then returned his Pokémon before it could sink any further into the wet sand as Ash thanked and congratulated Krabby on a great battle well fought. After that was done, he returned his Pokémon and the third and final battle went underway. The last battle to decide the match had been against Ash's Staryu and Devon's Gyarados. This particular battle could be classified as nothing short of intense and brutal. Ash's Staryu had strong attacks and combinations, as well as speed and endurance from all of the intense training it did, while Devon's Gyarados was nothing short of an insane powerhouse. Even though there was nothing physically wise that made Gyarados stand out from others of its species, its attacks were very strong and if connected with their target, could cause large amounts of damage. Especially to a much smaller Pokémon like Staryu. Gyarados also had a very foul temper much like almost every other Gyarados did, and this made it an even fiercer and much more dangerous opponent. Luckily for Staryu, it had trained with Ash's Gyarados on a regular basis, so it pretty much knew how to handle such an opponent. Still, that didn't mean Staryu took the battle lightly in any way, shape or form. Ash had made sure to constantly remind it not to let its guard down at any point, something Staryu paid very close attention to. There was not much that the smaller water type could do against such a vicious, constantly attacking and enraged opponent like Gyarados. Which meant that all the star-shaped Pokémon could do most of the time was use the incredible speed it possessed when spinning to dodge all, or at least as many of Gyarados' attacks as it could. The atrocious Pokémon definitely had powerful attacks and could use them repeatedly many times over without getting tired. Ash had felt certain that Devon trained his Pokémon to battle in such a way since throughout the entire match he had formed a strong suspicion, just by observing its style, that Gyarados was more of a one-dimension type of battler. Meaning that Devon seems to only train his Pokémon in certain aspects that made them as strong as they could be in one particular area of strength. Which, in Gyarados' case, meant being able to use very strong attacks over again and again without much fatigue following. Gyarados had used nothing but Aqua Tail, attempted to use Bite, Hyper Beam and Dragon Rage the entire battle. Staryu continuously used evasive moves like Rapid Spin, Agility and would occasionally even be able to hit Gyarados with Swift if it got lucky enough. Most of the time however, Staryu just dodged. Ash had known that his Pokémon wouldn't be able to keep that up though and had started going through all kinds of strategies that could possibly bring the powerful dragon-like Pokémon down. Misty, at the same time, had been completely lost as to how Ash would pull out a victory against such a strong Gyarados with a Pokémon like Staryu because, even though she was a water-type specialist, she couldn't see any way to take down such a Pokémon if she were to have been battling it with any of her own. In fact, only when Staryu was dodging one of Gyarados' Dragon Rage attacks did Ash himself finally come up with a strategy that he had felt would work. Just as Staryu had been hit with Gyarados' tail and sent crashing into the sand near Ash, the boy waited for his Pokémon to stand back up and shake the dizziness from its head before issuing his strategy. He commanded Staryu to charge back in towards Gyarados with a Rapid Spin, Agility combination while firing Swift at the large Pokémon. Staryu had taken off at Gyarados like a bullet, spinning like crazy while firing off Swift at it. Devon had commanded his Pokémon to use Dragon Rage to cut through the energy rays coming towards it, hopefully hitting Staryu in the aftermath. As soon as Gyarados launched its attack, Ash ordered Staryu to break away from its head-on charge and instead start spinning in a fast, wide circle around Gyarados. Staryu dodged out of the way just as Gyarados' Dragon Rage attack was released and cut through the star-shaped rays of Swift like nothing. Staryu then began rotating around Gyarados in a wide circle while slightly leaning to the side, its speed greatly enhanced by agility. Devon and everyone else had watched on in confusion as Staryu continued to spin around Gyarados in a circle that started to get tighter and tighter. Gyarados couldn't follow the fast movement and grew frustrated as it started lashing its body around, trying madly to stop Staryu in some way. Everyone eventually saw Ash's strategy though, as the spinning in circles around Gyarados that Staryu was doing started causing a massive sandstorm to whip up and surround the much larger Pokémon, blinding it from being able to see anything around it at all. Ash had then commanded Staryu to get inside of the sand cloud and attack Gyarados with Rapid Spin and Swift. Staryu disappeared into the sandstorm and all anyone could hear after that was Gyarados' cries of pain and anger as Staryu attacked its body with close-range Rapid Spin attacks and long-distance Swift rays. Devon eventually was able to think of something as a counter however and ordered his own Pokémon to use Aqua Tail to try and hit Staryu. Gyarados had then used the attack as ordered by its trainer and was lucky enough, unluckily for Staryu, to connect with the star-shaped Pokémon just as it was coming back in with another rapid spin. The strong hit caused Staryu to fly out of the sand cloud and into the ground near Ash with a painful thud. Devon then issued his Pokémon to use a twister attack to blow away the sand cloud and Gyarados did so, disposing of the irritating and accuracy-reducing annoyance in a matter of seconds. Staryu had just gotten back to its pointed feet then when Devon ordered his Pokémon to fire a Dragon Rage at Staryu. Ash knew that such an attack would mean definite trouble but also had a crazy thought enter his mind at the same time. Running off of his insane plan, he had told Staryu to stay where it was as Gyarados released its attack and the powerful blast of energy went rocketing towards his Pokémon, never saying another word as it came closer and closer. Finally, just as the attack was right upon them, Ash told Staryu to start spinning in place with an agility-enhanced rapid spin. Staryu did so and just before the blast could connect with it, Ash commanded his Pokémon to jump off the ground. Staryu quickly jumped up into the air as the explosion of Dragon Rage hit the ground where it just was and sent the smaller Pokémon flying high into the air. Staryu utilized this to its advantage and used the momentum of the explosion and the speed of rapid spin to shoot towards down Gyarados from above, firing the star-shaped rays of Swift at its opponent completely unbidden by Ash, something the boy was thankful to his Pokémon for. Gyarados still had its head slightly forward and mouth open from using Dragon Rage and because of this, it was defenseless as the rays of energy started slicing into it, making the large Pokémon reel back in pain. Staryu kept its forward momentum and continued using Swift as it eventually reached Gyarados and managed to land on top of its thrown-back face. Staryu had then looked down into Gyarados' gaping maw from where it was perched atop the Pokémon's lip and, charging up extremely powerful rays of energy from the gem within in its center, started pelting them down inside of Gyarados' mouth. Devon and Ash's friends had just looked on in shock at what was transpiring as Gyarados shut its eyes and bellowed in pain and rage as the sharp rays of Swift were continuously shot down into its open mouth.